And we're back here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk on AM 950 KOEL and KOEL.com with me, Elliot Clough, at Elliot Clough on Twitter. So we're talking a little bit more NBA draft here, but this time we're joined by Ti Windisch of the Gyro Step podcast. He's here to tell us a bit more about the Milwaukee roster and what he expects of AJ Green and his two-way contract. Ti, I contacted you last night, this morning, kind of last moment. So first of all, appreciate you hopping on. But now that you've had some time to look at some film, get some evaluation from maybe some other people, including myself, what are your thoughts on AJ Green signing that two-way with the Bucks, and maybe minus the roster situation in Milwaukee? What do you see from AJ in the little bit you've been able to evaluate it?
Yeah, I think I'm really intrigued. Of course, a player that goes undrafted signs a two-way after the draft, and we'll get an exact fit, but not expecting him to come in and start or anything like that. But clearly, the Bucks with Giannis Antetokounmpo are always going to be a team that puts a premium on shot making and players able to hit shots around Giannis. And I think to me, this is pretty clearly just taking a flyer on a guy who certainly did that in college, right? Pretty undisputed that AJ Green can take and make a lot of tough shots from distance, from the mid-range, really all over. That jumper is unique, and as you mentioned to me before we started recording, very hard to block because it basically goes straight up. So that's what it feels like to me, is just the Bucks wanting a closer look at a prospect who did not play against the top competition, maybe is not heralded like Marjan Beauchamp, who they drafted in the first round, or Beauchamp, excuse me. But I think this is a look at a player who, if he pans out, if he comes together, develops a little bit in Milwaukee in the Bucks system, could be useful down the line as a shooter, because in the NBA in general, but especially for a team with Giannis, you really cannot have enough shooting. And I think trying to look for more sources of that is a good idea for Milwaukee.
And so you did more or less factor in that roster, and Giannis being obviously he's the focus of the roster in Milwaukee, two-time MVP, of course. But when you look at AJ and what he brings to the table, of course he can put the ball on the floor too. That's something Panther fans have noticed. Does he fit a positional need? Obviously, you mentioned the shooting, but this quasi scoring guard, but also can distribute the ball. Is that what Milwaukee's looking for with this roster spot?
I think yes. I think clearly it's hard to get a true barometer because they had the Chris Middleton injury last playoff. So they desperately needed more ball handling for most of last playoff run. The need probably isn't quite as bad as it seemed, of course, because Middleton would take so much of that load on and was a primary initiator, if not the primary initiator, when they won the championship. But still, I think there was clearly a need for another guard who could probably come off of the bench, handle the ball, dribble. We did a podcast on what the Bucks need the most, and my co-host Rohan Kadi said someone who can dribble, because there just was not enough of that around Giannis and Drew Holiday and everyone else. So I do think that having another player who you trust to put the ball in their hands, who can create some offense for themselves or others, is certainly something the Bucks need. I think to an extent, every team needs more guys who can do that, but Milwaukee is not heavy on playmaking guards. I mean, I think Drew Holiday, for as great as he is, and he's a good to great playmaker, is not a typical ball dominant point guard, right? I think he's been called more of a combo guard in his career. And off the bench, George Hill struggled with injuries. And we'll see what he looks like next season if he's back. Javon Carter is an unrestricted free agent, and really more of a defensive floor spacing guard than a someone, again, who's going to create shots for himself or others. So that is a position of need for the Bucks. I think maybe one of their more stark positions of need. They have a decent amount of wing players now, with Pat Connaughton opting in. The big man rotation, they got Brook Lopez for another year. They could use a longer term solution. I think going into next season, there is room for a ball handling guard to pop and potentially really play some role for the Bucks.
And one thing that I think sticks out to a lot of people, considering AJ wasn't drafted, is the fact that, the Bucks could have signed him just for the summer league. They could have given him an Exhibit 10 contract, but they decide to put him on a two-way. What does that say to you about how much they value AJ?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was actually a little surprised that they signed one as quickly as they did. There is, of course, always the flurry of two ways and Exhibit 10s and camp deals signed right after the draft. But the Bucks ended last season with Sandro Mamukelashvili on a two-way, a player they seem pretty high on. I mean, they picked him 54th. He's not a franchise cornerstone or anything, but it seemed like the Bucks were high on him. And he could be on another two-way next year. He could be in a roster spot. They also had Lindell Wigginton. They have a couple of non-guaranteed guys around the team right now who are eligible for two ways, including Ray John Tucker. So I actually did not expect them to utilize a two-way spot right now. I figured they would kind of wait and maybe make that decision later. And of course, there's no guarantees. I think they signed Bronson Koenig out of Wisconsin to a two-way, and he didn't end up making it to the regular season roster. So it's not a guarantee for AJ Green at this point. But I do think it speaks to that they think highly of him. And I don't know, maybe there was a competition and offering a two-way versus a camp deal was an advantage for Milwaukee there. I have no information, but that is possible. But I do think it shows they're more than it's more than just a total passing interest, right? Of, hey, come to camp and we'll see what you've got. It is more than that, and it does show that the Bucks are pretty intrigued. I think, again, that shot making is really what stands out. I think they like what they see there.
Now, this piques my curiosity too, because there's that value there of the two-way contract. Again, we're talking with Ti Windisch of the Gyro Step podcast, covers the Milwaukee Bucks. We're on here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk on AM 950 KOEL and KOEL.com. That's a mouthful. So Ty, the thing that piques my interest here is that he did get that two-way contract, but the Bucks traded into that final pick and didn't select him. Yeah, so it was just kind of confusing. Who did they? I don't even know who they grabbed there.
Hugo Besson, a Frenchman who last played in New Zealand. So the order of operations there, they're drafting stashing him. It was reported the morning after the draft. So of course you can't draft and stash a player if you don't draft them. So they had to, out of those two players, I don't think there's a preference shown to Besson over AJ necessarily. I think it's more about having a player who played internationally who you can keep the rights on for a year, maybe trade down the line, maybe bring over, and then bring in AJ on the two-way contract. I think there's also, it gets complicated with international guys. Last year, they actually had to roster spot Yorgos Kalaitzakis out of Greece because there was a buyout. And if you buy out a player from an international contract, you cannot have them on a two-way. They need a roster spot with guaranteed years. That was not the case with Hugo, but there is a little bit more, I guess, intrigue and consideration with an international player, whether there's a buyout or if you're bringing them over right away. Whereas obviously a player who just finished a college career, a lot simpler process to just bring them into the organization. And you know, I really hope that AJ does make it to the Wisconsin Herd for some basketball there. I actually live in Oshkosh where the Herd play and cover that team very regularly. And I think they've shown a real knack for developing players in recent years. They've had some great coaching staffs come through there. Chase Buford now actually over in the NBL over in Australia coaching right now. Jalen Adams over there. Frank Mason won MVP in the Herd organization. So Christian Wood played a lot with the Herd, now just got traded. So I think it would be good for AJ, and I think it could be really good for the Bucks and the Herd as well to have him in. I mean, knockdown shooters in the G League, developmental or not, often put on a real show for everyone there too. And I think we'd probably get some really fun games down in Oshkosh with all the looks he might get.
And for Panther fans, that's pretty close. I mean, yeah. You know, as opposed to, you know, he worked out for the Warriors and the Nets. Milwaukee or Oshkosh, that's nothing. But it's good to hear in regards to their developmental process that things have turned out for them. That was actually going to be one of my questions, so you beat me to it. But when you're looking towards the summer league, which of course starts in just a couple weeks in Las Vegas, what are you going to be looking for from AJ? It's like that is why, you know, maybe not why we signed or why the Bucks signed him, but what I need to see from him in order that he could more or less guarantee that two-way spot and be with the Bucks this coming season.
I do think the ball handling will probably be pretty big. You know, I think they play, it feels like less games than ever. I know the schedule isn't complete because there's tournament games, but I think there's only like 3 or 4 games that are actually scheduled so far. So, you know, you're not going to say, oh, you shot 25% on 3, you know, whatever, we saw what we needed to see, because it's such a low number. The variance is going to be pretty stark. And I think, you know, there's another consideration here that the Bucks in the past have sometimes, you know, you draft a guy in the first round, which they actually haven't done in a while. kind of just put the ball in their hands and let them do a little too much in summer league, which is not, I think, would be a good thing for Marjon Beauchamp. So I really think it could be more beneficial for the Bucks overall if AJ is able to help with some of that ball handling load and setting up Beauchamp, who I think is certainly projects to be more of a wing player, more off ball. And, not having a good ball handler in summer league can really help, or can really hinder the look you get at a wing prospect or a big prospect or whoever else. So I don't know. We'll see exactly who they all bring. There's obviously other guards out there as well. But if he's able to, in addition to that scoring punch and that spacing, which is another thing, Beauchamp, the Ignite team shot 20 or 31% from three, I think, this past season. So really no spacing there. It's not easy to operate. So I think provide some spacing, provide some ball handling, and Wall showing what he can do and impressing the Bucks there. I think could also then really, it would be, not appreciated, but I think it would be very beneficial for the whole team, for the other players there. But in terms of Bucksy and stuff, if he's going to make it on the Milwaukee Bucks level, the defense is going to be the big thing. Mike Budenholzer might as well be allergic to playing guys who don't defend. He hates that. I mean, I think all basketball coaches to an extent, outside of like Mike D'Antoni or whatever, but especially Bud, you've got to be able to defend. You've got to, make quick decisions with the ball. So that will be major. I think proving that he can hang with athletes, that he's going to work on that end. So those I think would be the biggest swing skills for him to demonstrate in summer league or preseason or with the herd if we get there with the Bucks.
So we talk about the herd and their development. We talk about the necessity for AJ to improve defensively, and that's no secret. I think a lot of people know that, especially those that cover the MVC. When we're talking development, has a development? Let's see here. I'm trying to phrase this the way I want it to. We've seen development offensively. That's been a big thing that a lot of people look towards when they're talking development. Has development defensively been a focus for the herd too?
I think to an extent, it's just harder to measure, but I do think it's something that they prioritize and they talk about, and the herd have had a good defense these last couple of years. I think Jalen Adams made big strides on Chase Buford's staff, and that helped. He had, I think, a Team USA look because they use the G League players now to do the qualifying tournament. So he got to play with Team USA a bit. And I think he took it upon himself to improve on that end. And that's a big part of his success now overseas and getting more attention. And I think Lindell Wigginton is a guy who was pretty unheralded coming in. He made his NBA debut this year with the Bucks, but he got that two-way spot because of defense. He had strong offensive showings, but he became the herd stopper on that end. And he's a 6'1" guard. He's not like I don't even want to throw a name and sound like I'm making a ludicrous comp, but he doesn't have that typical wing defender body type. But he is a guy who really works hard on that end and really defends. So I don't know how much better necessarily he got in the herd defensively. You'd hope some, but I do think it shows the organization at least is prioritizing that and making sure players know that for him to be the one who gets the call up, gets the two-way, despite maybe not being the most offensive, flashiest player. And I think Rajon Tucker, who ended up getting signed to a roster spot with the Bucks to end the season, is a guy who initially got called up 2 years ago to the Jazz because he had so many high-flying dunks, so many great offensive performances. He got his Bucks call up after he got a lot bigger physically. You can tell he made that an emphasis, and I spoke to him about it. And he really improved his rebounding, which is kind of defense in itself. Like he's a much better all-around player, even though you might look at the box score numbers and go, scoring 5 less points per game. And he's still not a knockdown three-point shooter. But I think the defense, the rebounding, rounding out his game was a big emphasis for him. So I certainly think, are they going to turn around and make anyone a lockdown defender? No, unfortunately not. But it's clearly an emphasis, and I think the players are pretty well aware of that.
Iowa State fans who are listening, I don't know that they would have expected multiple Lindell Wigginton name drops here this morning, but we got it covered.
That's true. I forgot the local connection. I'm saying it like he's not, like people aren't aware of him. But right. Yeah, I love Lindell, man.
One last question for you, Ty. AJ is a kid that Panther fans know he is willing to put the work in. He didn't come in as a 4-star recruit and say, I'll be fine. I'm playing mid-major level. He came in and he put the work in to eventually make his dream come true and get to the NBA. You know, we've seen Giannis rise up the ranks due to a lot of hard work and the technical stuff that he's done. It appears the organization as a whole values that desire to continue to get better and develop. Would you agree with that sentiment? Do you think that's an edge that AJ has coming in?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it probably has a lot to do with, why he was the guy they prioritize. I think to this point, the only player, unless I miss one, that they've come to terms with after the draft. And I think it all comes from Giannis. The whole franchise's culture, ideology, everything stems from Giannis. That's how having a true franchise player works. But I think the guy I would mention here is Pat Connaughton, who really came into the Bucks as a pretty unheralded player, and the second contract he signed with Milwaukee, pretty panned by Bucks fans because he was known mostly for being, quote, Giannis's workout buddy. He had that great work ethic. He lived in the gym, but the results weren't necessarily there early. He wasn't a great defender. He wasn't knocking down threes, but the work panned out. And now Connaughton is one of their most reliable wing players and just opted into a player option that Bucks fans think is a steal for Milwaukee. So, I think that is very much Bucks culture. It's not flashy. It's putting the work in. They talk about it relentlessly in post-game pressers and stuff, like getting better every day, building good habits, all these sorts of things. And all of that stems from Giannis, who, as you mentioned, is a legendary, workaholic. Maybe the stories aren't out there as much as some other guys, but that's all he does. I mean, he gets better every single year, and you don't do that by accident. So I certainly think the work ethic will be a big plus for AJ Green with the Bucks, and I think it probably played a big part in Milwaukee seeking him out for that two-way contract.
He is Ti Windisch of the Gyro Step podcast, covers the Milwaukee Bucks and the Oshkosh Herd. Ti, thanks so much for joining us today, helping us talk a little bit about AJ and his likelihood of fulfilling that two-way contract with the Bucks.
Elliot, thanks so much for having me. It was a blast.